right. And Ben, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Sean. How about you?
Super good. Very excited to have you guys on and chat through some go-to-market strategy today and help the attendees with how to quickly grow their organizations in 2023. So for those of you that have joined, we appreciate you hopping on. We know that everybody's really busy and this is a crucial and critical time of the year to get out to a jump start and get ahead on your revenue and profit goals for 2023. So with that said, we're honored to have ZoomInfo join us today to go over the 3 essential steps to accelerate your go-to-market plan in 2023 and beyond. And we have Ben Salzman, their Senior Vice President of GTM and Special Projects, joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, so excited to be here. There's going to be a couple of poll questions and some Q&A at the end. So looking forward to engagement throughout and just really excited to be here with you all.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I always like to mention is if at any point during this presentation, you've got to pop off for some reason, you can always put something in chat. We'll try to answer it at the breaks with the polls. The other thing is if you'd like to book a meeting, there's a QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of many of the slides that goes right to my personal calendar. And we can hop on a call sometime in the next week or two and discuss your specific needs. So let's just frame it up here a little bit. Quantum Business is a go-to-market organization that helps companies with the overarching strategic initiative and integration of putting together key pieces of targeting, attracting, nurturing, converting, and wowing, which we really say that's data, marketing, development, sales, and client success. And we're a proud partner of ZoomInfo, and so they've been kind enough to join us today. Do you want to just share a little bit about ZoomInfo and what your role in the marketplace is, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So ZoomInfo, hopefully you all have heard of it or use it today. We have about 30,000 customers, mostly B2B companies from some of the largest and most sophisticated companies in the world that rely on us for account data, people data, technographic data, but increasingly through a number of acquisitions over this last several years, orchestration, engagement, outbound call recording as well. So there's a lot of sort of things that we've done to bolster our stack over time. And we just love partnering with Quantum. Sean, thanks for being such a great partner to ZoomInfo, and excited to share more about what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. To go ahead and kick it off, we're going to ask a quick question. What is the current status of your go-to-market as it sits right now in your organization? So we've went ahead and launched that. We have a couple of options here. We don't have a formal GTM strategy. It's outdated, it's fully developed, but not implemented, or it's running on all cylinders. So let's see how we end up panning out here. Looks like, all right, things are coming in. Wow, it's pretty even. What are you expecting this to say, Ben?
From what I see, I think most people are sort of at a place where they have it developed like in their head or in the best reps head, but it's not necessarily implemented in a consistent way or done sort of centralized, right? Like most of the time when I see a company, when I first get there, it's sort of like, if you look at the sort of spectrum of like fragmented versus centralized, it tends to be fragmented. So there's pockets of goodness happening. People know who to target. They know what to say, but it's not industrialized and sort of made available for the entire team. But what's your perspective on that, Sean?
Yeah, I would say they have somewhat of an understanding from what they know, from where they sit. Oftentimes, though, as we begin to really look at the overarching go-to-market, they realize maybe there were some pieces missing. So as I end this poll here, and I'm going to share the results with everybody. Here's how we turned out, right? 28% don't have a formal GTM strategy. 25% believe it's outdated. 28% say it's fully developed and not implemented. And then there's 19% that believe theirs is fully developed and implemented. Any thoughts on that, Ben?
Well, I think it's fascinating to see the distribution, right? Pretty even across the board. And I think, we're going to get into this in this webinar, but I think, what I I think is interesting for the people who said that GTM strategy is full of developed and implemented. That's a really exciting place to be. What I have found is that even when we find companies who sort of feel that that's where they're at, there's often a next level or sort of like a failure of imagination of like what else they can do and how to use this data in more interesting ways. So that's some of the stuff I'm excited to talk about, to see if we can, point at like what's that next frontier for some of the people who think that they're there already. But for those who are not, hopefully some of the ideas from today will help them to make that leap.
Absolutely. Cool. So just to set the scene, right? Organizations are kind of struggling with three key challenges, which is the efficiency gap. Everybody's looking at how do we do more with less moving into 2023 and really find the efficiency and increase the productivity of the teams that we have in place. How do we operate and use operations as leverage? And then data is constantly decaying and they're wasting data. So whether that means there's changes happening inside their database and they're not keeping up, or they're purchasing data or leveraging old data, but maybe there's insights in some of the marketing campaigns, but they're really not leveraging. So they're going to waste. What do you think is the number one out of those three that's catching organizations from what you see?
Yeah. And I'll go through in these next few slides to give a little more detail on that. I think number two of really not being able to get proper leverage from operations. I think, ops has traditionally in some companies been thought of as a more tactical thing, sales comp, territory assignment, things of that nature. And what we're seeing is companies who can implement a more sophisticated go-to-market ops framework to actually act more like a clearinghouse for raw data that they can sort of like process, stage, normalize, and plug it into plays in a sophisticated way to take that responsibility away from the reps and give them more time to sell. That's probably the biggest thing, because that sort of leads to efficiency. It leads to solving some of the decay and waste problems. So it's almost that the ops leverage can help to address all three. But what's your take on this, Sean? Which of these three seems like the one that the companies struggle with most?
I would say the efficiency gap, but I would just flip it. I think the reason for that is number two and number three. And so when you look at organizations, especially those that have been around for a long time, we've got customers that have been in business for 75 to 100 years. They have a ton of data, but they don't know how to leverage it and turn it into insights. And then from there, actionable items that they can go out and execute upon to grow their revenue at scale and make it a quicker, faster, smoother growth pattern. So all three of them are very important. And I think they're very interchangeable and play nicely together.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide and we'll just talk a little bit about this. Sean and I, as we were chatting this week, getting ready for this, I was telling Sean the story. We were talking to a company, a very large tech company that most people on this webinar have heard of. They have 1,000 sellers, these 1,000 AEs. And, conservatively, those people are each paid $100K a year, right? And it's probably more. Some of them probably make much more than that. That's $100 million a year that this company is spending on sales costs, just on salaries, right? Not including all the tools and enablement, all the things. And when, they were spending about $80,000 on data total for their go-to-market org. And when we asked them why there was such an imbalance, they said that they sort of thought it was a fundamental part of the rep's job to go out and find that data and figure out what to do with it, that was selling. And I think that the world has just changed a lot. So that used to be right, but the world's changed around it. And that sort of has become a little bit, I think, outdated, where there's this explosion of raw data now of all types. And to have reps be handling raw data, sourcing it, processing it, it's just unnecessary given how much compute power and how much sort of operational power can be given. So, I'd say that's one thing, is there's a huge just gap in terms of the cost of sales and how much efficiency those reps can get. And if you go to the next slide, I'd say one of the things that we see.
Ben, would you mind if I add just one key point on this? So I'd like to talk a lot about specialization. And as we get into the quantum growth model later, we brought up target, attract, nurture, convert, and wow. A mistake I oftentimes see organizations make is they're asking that rep to be a data input and data analyst, a marketing expert, and write sales sequences, right? Be able to cold call with the best of them, close the deals, and then manage the account. what I love is there's tools that organizations like ZoomInfo can actually do to help enable in all 5 of those areas. But you also hit on another key point, which is begin to think about specialization. So if I have a great closer, I want them closing. If I've got someone that's awesome at client success, I want them out in front of clients and continuing to nurture. And we'll talk about how ZoomInfo actually helps empower some of that. But before we jumped off of here, because you started to kind of go down that path of what we want salespeople to do, I think that's so key. And if you go back to the previous slide, right, that ops leverage and that data decay, well, it's costing those companies a lot of business, right? Because the one key point is sometimes the reps are actually making enough money or hitting their goals. And when they don't play ball, it's hurting the value of your organization at an institutional level. So anyways, that's all I had on that.
No, that's 100% right. And I think you spoke to it here, the specialization, right? Like this is sort of the way that most companies think about scaling their playbook, is to ask their sales team to handle all those core things. Like, who are we going after? What do we know about them? What are all the plays that we can run? What's the content in each of those plays? What's the touch pattern or the cadence or sequence? How do we get all the data in one place? How do we, get it from Snowflake or Salesforce or HubSpot or wherever and get it into the rep's hands? Then how do we plug the humans in, right? The sales motion is like the enablement, talk tracks, messaging frameworks, et cetera. And then execution, making sure that, that things are getting in market, you're measuring them, et cetera. And if you switch to the next slide, instead of asking your sales team to sort of have like 10 different versions of that, 10 different levels of quality, 10 different levels of rigor, creating this new lane, right, that we call go-to-market ops, and some companies call it something different, creating this new lane to give leverage to the go-to-market team so that you can do a lot of that centrally, right? Like targeting and knowing who you're going after, modeling for fit score and engagement score and those sorts of things, and data pipelines as an example. Those are purely sort of technical or analysis type roles or type of activities or tasks. Having salespeople work on that, it's not just they don't like doing it, they're not good at it, and they don't have time to do it, right? So the more leverage you can give to have these reps stand on the shoulders of this centralized work to actually go out there and spend more time with customers, that's the holy grail and where the market is going. But I'd love to hear your perspective, Sean, on what you've seen when companies have thought about it this way.
Well, absolutely. So we actually refer to it oftentimes as Rev Ops, but I like go-to-market ops even more. So we've got go-to-market strategy, which to me is the strategic integration and alignment of those 5 key areas, which is your targeting that you have here, right? But your data, your marketing, your development, your sales, and your client success, those are in the middle. Then at if it was like a sandwich, basically, on the bottom is the technical and operational integration of the same 5 key areas, right? So when people said that we have a go-to-market strategy and it's working, I think most CEOs that with some sophistication kind of understand they want things talking. There's some silos in the organization where about 99% of the failure that we see happens is right here, exactly where you're talking, which is in the go-to-market ops or the Rev Ops. It's the technical and operational integration of those key areas and truly making it work. And I love what you guys have done at ZoomInfo to try to bring as many pieces of that together as possible to make it as simple and streamlined for somebody to implement and execute on. Because I'm not naive to the fact that this can be dense at times, right? And there's a lot of moving parts, but ultimately it's how do we bring efficiency, right? Right back to slide number 1. How do we bring efficiency to that sales organization?
Totally. Yeah. And then jump to problem number 3 that I think companies aren't thinking about enough is there's just a huge amount of waste and decay in the data industry. And it's not operators' fault, right? It's just the nature of it is you're producing a huge amount of data that might go unused or misinterpreted, but a lot of the data just changes. And that's just how the world is, right? So if you go to the next slide, I think Forrester says something like 30% of data decays every year. And it's not that the data is bad. It's just that the world has simply changed, right? So something like 25% of people leave their job to go to a different job, not because they hated your product or they didn't want to use it, but because they got a new job and you got to track those people down, right? companies change or get acquired, things happen in the market, news stories around M&A and funding and even pivoting to a different industry. And, you know, there's new companies that are created every day, right? So how do you get a handle on a new pipeline of companies that are being funded and maybe, you know, just raise a big seed or A round that weren't in existence to be in the database? And you'll sometimes hear people complain, oh, like you're missing that company. Like, yeah, it was created yesterday, right? So like it's in there tomorrow, but the world just changes often. So, you know, that's another thing that people have to think about. It's a constantly moving ball. You've got to like adapt and change. It's not like you do it one time and then you can execute. It's an ongoing project to manage all of these.
I would even add too, right? So oftentimes inside of an organization, it's not that the company has never thought of these things. They've thought, okay, when people leave their jobs and our champion at A company goes to B company, we need to stay in front of them, right? And today somebody might have done that, or, you know, previously they might have done that by all of a sudden seeing an acknowledgement on LinkedIn and trying to manually keep track of that. Or the next time they call, there's a decision maker change and someone at the office happens to say, yeah, Ben headed over to company B. What you guys talk about is how do we take that at scale? I mean, Quantum's got customers that have tens of thousands of B2B customers. How do we take that at scale so that automatically it happens, right? And so there's a few ways. One is by bringing in the data, keeping it fresh, and always looking for that next trigger. So instead of trying to do that manually or barbed wire the process together, you guys are proponents of, hey, we're going to give you the data, but not just the data. We're also going to give you the process automation and the streamlining and the thought process behind how to execute upon it. So I know we've got some later slides. I don't want to spoil the actionable items, the goods, but this stuff right here is so key. And when you talk to CEOs, it's a common theme that they say, yeah, we used to do that. I don't know why we stopped, because we're human beings, right? And we're just not capable of keeping up the way that the data machines like a ZoomInfo are able to.
Totally. Yeah. And we'll get to that, but that's a key theme for our best companies is industrializing what your best reps are already doing. So we'll talk more about that. I love that.
Absolutely. So guys, let's get to it, right? What are the 3 essential steps to accelerate your go-to-market motion? Well, step 1 is to process map and actually segment out lists and ensure there's a process around how to have no lead left behind. Okay, so that's step 1. The second one is to utilize the best-in-class sales and marketing automation and data tools so that you've got all the power behind you that you're going to need to be able to execute at a high level on your plan and your strategy. Remember, they got the GTM strategy. That's just the thought process and getting everything in alignment, but you've got to have the tech. And then the third piece, which is really the go-to-market ops piece, is the integration and execution and automation of those different key components through your tech stack and through your sales and marketing processes and data processes. Anything you'd add to this, Ben?
No, I mean, we're going to go deeper on each of these, but it is to your point earlier about these things singing in harmony. If you do just one, right, you end up leaving a lot on the table. So I think what I'm really excited about sharing today is how if you bring these things together, it's really that concept of like, 1 + 1 = 3. So we'll get to some of that, but I think this is exactly right.
Absolutely. Okay. So what is the foundation? You guys have heard us talk about it a little bit already, but the quantum growth model is built on the concept of a flywheel of how do we make this thing go faster and faster, starting with the target, then how do we attract the targets, nurture them through SDRs and marketing, convert them into customers, and then wow them and turn them into someone we can cross-sell, upsell, and get referrals from. And then the second ring talks about the first thing you need to do is systemize. So that's going to be the mapping piece. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Optimize is, okay, now that we know what we want to do, how do we actually optimize this process? And that's where some of the tech comes into play and even process improvement. And then third is that go-to-market ops and automating using AI and really taking it to another level. Anything you'd like to add just on this quantum growth model piece?
I just love that WOW is a stage, and I feel like not enough companies, really think about investing in creating those magic moments for their customers and actually creating those WOW moments, right? Like it seems like a marketing slide, but that should be the North Star, is how do you get customers to think of it as, changing their world in a way that's very visceral. So I just love wow
Well,
as a stage.
Ben, imagine one of your champions gets promoted in the company, and because that gets enriched right through ZoomInfo, that triggers a gift getting sent out congratulating them on a promotion. I mean, that's another level, right? So this will be interesting because I don't think this is in the slides as we go, but we've done tests with clients that cross-sell even in their own customer bases. So they've got thousands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they haven't even had the right decision maker in that other part of the business that they're already servicing with one product to cross-sell to. So even in the wow stage, right, ZoomInfo can come in and really help people enrich that data and take advantage and lower that client acquisition cost that they've already invested so much in to get the client the first time around, which we all know is the most expensive time around.
100%. Yep. That's exactly right.
So as we get into process mapping and list segmentation and really leaving no lead behind, what we notice is leads fall off all the time at organizations. And so we want to map this out and streamline it. And ZoomInfo is a huge part of that for businesses. But first thing we need to do is identify our ICP, then break it down into the buyer personas. And then we'll talk about some of the other pieces and how a ZoomInfo plays into those. But this is all stuff that actually ZoomInfo can help you guys do. So you can build an ICP inside of ZoomInfo. Then you can attack the job titles you want, and then even begin to do messaging based on those personas. And as new people hit your list, boom, you send off automations either through integrations or through ZoomInfo themselves. And here's what it looks like. So you're not going to be able to read it. We didn't expect you to catch all this in the 30 seconds will be on this slide, but how many of you have mapped out your entire GTM process? And this isn't a poll, so just go ahead and throw it in the chat or the Q&As if you have done this, but from start to finish. So on the left, what you're seeing there, Ben, is exactly several ways that individuals or targets can come into your ecosystem. So you got third-party data. That would be, in some cases, ZoomInfo, for instance, paid ads, trigger events. So is a company hiring for something that you could be the replacement for that hiring? Social, and there's several, and different companies could have different ways. As it comes in and a target's been identified, what do we need to do? Well, we need to enrich the data. We need to start thinking about the customer's goals, thoughts, successes, failures, points of pain. So the gray, we say, is really kind of what you're putting the customer through. The blue is behind the scenes. That's your GTM ops, if you think of it that way. As they move into that awareness stage, we're starting to market to them. So now, just to make it real clear for everybody in the call, like, let's say we've decided we want to go out and get every CFO in Seattle, Washington in the manufacturing industry because we're going to sell them a software. We're going to bring them in here. What are the thoughts they have, the challenges they have, the pain, the success they're having in their jobs? And as we build awareness campaigns and consideration campaigns, which we can get enrichment from ZoomInfo to help us with these pieces, how do we personalize that messaging, right? That's what's so cool. It helps with the personalization. Then it comes down to target call after we've got certain insights about their behavior engagements. And then as we leverage, say, a parallel dialer to do that dialing on each of those call outcomes, how do we go through and actually have a nurture so that constantly people are getting scooped back onto the wagon, right? They're not just falling off because I called them, they said, I'm not interested. And now a year later, no one's touched them. So we stay in front of them. Then we move through the proposal and presentation processes, and are they a fit, not a fit, and then over to solution determination and through that. And we won't do it this exact moment, but there's different pieces throughout this entire journey that ZoomInfo can help with. And so it's an amazing tool. But what I really want you guys to think about here is, do you have this even mapped out to figure out what you're trying to do with the technologies and the tools and the data you have? So this was kind of a mouthful here, but Ben, anything you want to add to this?
No, I just think what you just said is really important. Just like, it can be more visceral if you get a real comprehensive visual to really think through what your journey looks like. And I think companies are it's like, oh, we don't have a journey. Like, no, everyone has a journey. It may be a like very simplified one, and it may be, sort of like hammer people with ads till they come to your site and then call them. But that's still a journey. I think the what you're pointing out here is there's a lot to it, and there's just a huge number of paths and sort of decision trees that can go off on that journey if you build it out. So yeah, to your point, doing this work to look at it comprehensively is really valuable.
It'd be interesting if we would have done that poll at this stage, what the answer would now be.
Right, exactly.
All right, so Ben, let's go ahead and kick it over to you. And why don't you share some of the GTM plays across the different customer segments?
Yeah, and so I think what you just talked through is sort of that buyer's journey, and I think what this slide and the next few slides are really meant to do is sort of take a look at cross sections or pieces of that. And so one thing I think is important for companies to think about is really having a playbook that is designed to impact all parts of the customer life cycle, right? So I think what we often see is customers really focus on top of funnel. We need more leads, more opportunities. But if you're running a real business at scale, you've got to have a sophisticated motion around how do you acquire companies? How do you look to upsell and cross-sell? How do you make sure that they stick with you? And if you happen to lose them, how do you get them back and be able to manage churn? So, I'd say that's one thing to think about, is just really building out sophisticated plays across all parts of the life cycle, not just top of funnel. But if you go to the next slide, what we'll talk about here is, and yeah, sorry, we'll go out one more. We already talked about this framework. One of the things that, we hold dear at ZoomInfo is having a really rigorous process on how we go from, we want to run a play to getting that play in market. So it all starts with having a hypothesis, right? Like a really well-documented or articulated hypothesis of like, what are we going after? What's the premise here, right? What are the goal for this particular play? How do we build the audience for that play, source all the right data? How do we think about the design of the play? So our planning and design process takes into account everything from, what are the principles that we're tugging on for each of these touches, right? Like, are we going after a scarcity play? Is it a social proof? What's actually working in the messaging to do the heavy lifting? And then all the operational work of making sure we can map all of everything, the raw data into Salesforce assignment, getting into place. So just to your point, this is sort of like a very abbreviated version, but a really rigorous process. And what that sort of manifests as, if you go to the next slide, is our go-to-market process at ZoomInfo. And actually, we'll kick it, Sean, talk a little bit about the Rev Efficiency Model, and then we'll get back into some of the plays that we run here.
Yeah, so just a piece here that ties in so well with what you just showed, right? But everyone spends a lot of energy out and expand. And we talk about, especially if you're a business that's been running for a while, but keep your revenue is the best way to grow your revenue. Don't be losing, right? So churn, grow it, cross-sell, upsell, that's huge. Multiply as referrals. So by wowing, everybody's got a friend just like them. Imagine if every one of your customers gave you one referral a year that converted, you double your business every year just by the ecosystem of your current customers, keeping the ones you had, let's say at 1,000, and then you could upsell them a little bit, right? And then get a friend that's probably similar to them because we're all in similar social circles. You could literally double to 2.5, 3 times your business and not even leave the ecosystem of your own customers. That's what's interesting. Convert is anybody that's already ever been in your ecosystem. You lost a deal 5 years ago. They're stuck in the pipeline. They attended this webinar. Like, those would all be people we'd want to convert, right? And then you have expand, which is everyone you've never heard of. What I love is how ZoomInfo helps in every one of these key areas. And so I actually put together a little bit of information on how that could work. So let's just say in that keep stage, right? If there's a change in decision maker, I want to know that. And depending on what my sales cycle is, there's industries where you're not out there every week or month. You might go quite a few months, unfortunately, without seeing that customer. And the last thing you need is, while you've been taking some time away from the customer, somebody new comes in and all of a sudden you walk in one day and it's too late. So that's important. Secondly, would be inside of your own customer, there's changes in champions, there's intent. They could be looking for some of the other products and services you sell. One of the things that we find often is businesses do not do a great job at even explaining and all of the offerings they have, and they certainly don't do a great job at running that cross-sell motion. Most businesses we find that do have some significant cross-sell potential are cross-selling less than 5 to 10% of their database that's a current customer. So that piece is crucial. Then it's by the social piece, right? Who might you know that we know already? And then building a cadence around that referral piece and having it automated and having the information at your fingertips. All the way then, obviously, we all know how you guys help convert and expand people, especially out and expand. That's what most people probably know you for. But if you leverage it inside of your current customer base and keep people and grow and upsell and ask for referrals and have that information, I think those are some amazing opportunities to leverage that client acquisition costs that you've already paid the majority of, right? So keeping, you already paid for that, but there's a little bit on the client success side, you got to continue to pay to keep them. Grow, obviously they're your customers, so you've already paid for a lot of that. The most expensive that you paid the least for so far is expand, and then people go chasing that. So that's the dollars that are going to really run up quickly. Any thoughts on this, Ben?
No, it makes so much sense to me. Like, I don't know what the latest numbers are from some of the analysts, but just the amount of costs up front to get that, that first meeting. Some people sort of the round number that people sometimes use, like it's $1,000 to get that first meeting. Like, if you think about it, just from a fundamental perspective, like if you have them as a customer, it's literally free and one email away to have a meeting about something impactful, to tell them about a new product that you're shipping or a new capability that you've shipped, within an existing product. So it's like, it's literally the cost of like $1,000 a meeting to like $0 a meeting to upsell, and just thinking from that perspective. Plus they're already familiar with their brand. They already are provisioned. They've already gotten through security. There's all this friction that's been pulled out of it on, getting them over the line in the first place. So I think what you said is just really, people forget to double down and make their existing customers really happy. That's what matters.
Well, and when you made that customer happy, remember, let's say 30% of those champions moved each year. How much lower is that client acquisition cost now when you recognize that one of your champions just moved and now you can call on them and it takes one phone call and you're getting a meeting versus sitting there trying to chase down a net new. So I love this model. We came up with it as we started to recognize this challenge, and you guys definitely play into all the areas of it. So here's back to, some of the playbooks that you guys run, some of the plays you guys run.
Yeah. And this is really a visual, meant to sort of show an example of modular plays that you can take off the shelf. So we'll talk about that more. There's some really exciting announcements coming up in this quarter on how we're going to productize that and make it available for everyone. But if you go to the next slide, a quick look at what we do here internally. As I alluded to earlier, we have a really sophisticated go-to-market motion at ZoomInfo, and a huge credit to Henry, Chris, Scott, and a lot of the people who've been here a long time have set this up long before I landed at ZoomInfo. But what we have is something like 75 evergreen plays that run every quarter, no matter what. So it's not meant that everyone on the call today will take down all of this. It's kind of
can I pause you for 1 second? Yeah. I don't want to lose this thought. You said something that's so key right there. You said, and you might lose it in translation because you talked about something, but evergreen plays.
Yeah.
And will you just expand a little on A, what you mean by evergreen, and B, why that's so important to hit people at the right timing and not have to sit and recreate the wheel all the time on the marketing side of your business?
100%. Yeah. I think evergreen, think of it as always on, right? Like, you want to create a go-to-market engine that's running in the background. So when you wake up in the morning, you have more new first meetings, more upsell, cross-sell, more conversations around how do you retain customers that are just happening. So there's things that happen in the world, like someone leaves a job and you want to go track them down, or someone acquires a new company or uninstalls a technology or installs a technology. There's all of these things that happen in the real world that are really triggers to think of, like, how do you kick off this play, right? Temporal signals that tell you something changed. And then each one of these has a recipe of, like, okay, when that thing changes, we go out and source this particular persona. We put them into, this play or this campaign with this content. Here's the touch cadence, here's the channel mix. All those things can be wired up and industrialized to just happen every time that thing goes off. So when I say evergreen, it means that you build and industrialize a play such that it happens every time that scenario comes up without having to think about it. So there's a lot of upfront work to get it right. But if you can wire it up so it just happens, then you're moving everyone else up the value chain to layer on to that. Okay, let's go turn over every rock. Let's place every last call. Let's think of new plays. Let's run experiments. What new data can we incorporate to unlock a play that maybe we aren't running today? Most of the time, companies are just sitting there doing the dials and the wrenches and all the things to make each play happen every day, that they don't have time for innovation. So the more you can set up these evergreen plays that just go, that's when you can really help to give the team leverage and to unlock, some of that, the next level that people can get to.
Well, and you really, one thing you didn't even talk about here is you're cutting down the training time when you bring in that new person, because you're setting them into the machine. I don't want to say a cog in the machine, because that's not fair, right? They're a person, but they are able to come in, and what they have to learn, and that learning curve is drastically cut down, because a lot of what they would have had to do in the past, like let's say if an SDR had to go out and source all their own lists off of Google and then figure out their own follow-up emails and how to do templatize, like if that's done for them, right? And you guys have already got triggers and you've got the data, they can do the one thing, right? And back to specialization, that allows them to get really, really good, like best in the world at one thing versus trying to be okay at everything across that entire buyer's journey.
Totally. Yeah. And go to the next slide really quick. I'll just kind of preview an effort that we're doing internally. We've soft launched this, so it's available today, but we're investing a bunch more in it, and we'll have a lot more to say in the middle of this quarter. But if you go to zoominfo.com/plays, this is basically a collection of all of the sort of what I would think of as repeatable B2B plays every company can and should run. So there's probably dozens or hundreds more that are not on this list, but these are ones that sort of like, if you're setting up a real evergreen, engine like this, they're really good places to start. And so each one of these has a stage, has a difficulty, it has channels attached to it, an explainer. And then, importantly, if you click that try it button there in the bottom right down the line, it will kick off the workflow and actually make it so you can just run this out of the box. So I would encourage everyone to, check this out and send us what we're missing, right? Like, we're not saying that this is every play that ever will exist. It's just, what we have learned from some of our best customers. So as mentioned, Sean, I have the pleasure of both spending a lot of time with customers and our most strategic, in strategic services for some of our biggest customers, but also running our internal playbooks team in partnership with a huge number of other folks, where we get this flywheel. We learn, we're seeing a play that's out in the market that's really working with this company. Hey, let's test it internally, and vice versa, of running a play internally and saying, hey, we should export this and have this available to everyone. So we're trying to industrialize these best practices and sort of make them available to the entire community. It's a big part of what we're thinking about for this year.
That's amazing, because it does really cut down the learning curve, right? Because I think, some organizations, they get intimidated by go-to-market. And so what they do is they really revert back. And then, organizations like ours have to kind of push them and remind them the future's not going backwards. So let's get out there. And the more you empower and enable these people to be successful, the better it's going to be for the client and you guys. So I love these plays. These are awesome way. Even if you guys just go in and research, this is a great place to begin to think about maybe where there's some areas of opportunity in your business to quickly scoop up and grow your revenue.
Hey, and can you hear me, Sean? Are you still?
We have a flywheel, but we also turn it into a funnel for the sake of this. Where am I hitting different people in different parts of the buyer's journey? And so we try to make it a 2D version. We know real life is 3D and more complicated, but in the target, attract, nurture, convert, and wow. Well, up at the top, do I even have clean data and target lists? Have I identified an ICP? And is it pointed the right direction? Because if that piece is 50% wrong, the rest of that funnel is cut in half, right? And so we talk a lot then about KPIs, and the higher up in the funnel the KPI gets cut off or cut down, it's going to impact the rest. So everything from conversation pickup rate to email open rate to we actually track what percentage of our database meets our ICP, what the buyer personas are in our database, because it's so important. And again, as we go through, we know that, for instance, in nurture, when we're calling, if we call mobile phone numbers, I think this is a stat you guys have, It goes from 22 minutes if you were manually dialing, from 22 minutes to get a hold of a decision maker down to 5. So that's something where ZoomInfo immediately, if all you did was everything was the same, but you called mobile phone numbers, you might be able to 4 times your conversations. I suppose some of that would have been conversations, say 2-3 times your conversations, right? Just from that piece. And so as you're going through, just look at this and think about, where could you guys use some improvement and some opportunity for growth? Any thoughts on this, Ben?
No, I think you said it. It's really just important to be so granular at each stage, right? Like there's so much detail behind the scenes that companies sort of like take for granted. It's like, yeah, like we do that. But is it documented? Is it available for a new person who joins a team to really understand the ins and outs of it? What are all the inputs? What are all the outputs? How do we store all that data, right? Like having a data dictionary that maps to each one of these processes, right? So I always tell companies, like, get into the details, right? Like you should have a backlog of plays you run, a backlog of attributes that you have that power each of those plays. You know where you get that attribute at what fill rate, how do you store it in CRM? Is it available to everyone? Is it available to some people? Just getting into the details and not skipping over and sort of like making the assumption it's going to be easy for someone to come in and run that play.
Absolutely. All right. And the machine, guys, it really relies on the data. And so the next poll question here is, tell us a little bit about the data that you guys currently have in your organizations and how you feel about it. So how confident are you in the accuracy of your CRM data? It's outdated, it's mostly accurate, or we have enriched our CRM data within the past week and it's all up to date and ready to go. What are you expecting this to say?
I get the sense that a lot of people will report that they have enriched their data in the last week. Like that is where the market has really shifted towards, is more API driven, real-time enrichment. But we'll find out, because I think enriching it in the last week doesn't necessarily mean that it's all accurate, right? Because if it's and I guess it's also in the eye of the beholder. So yeah, I'll be fascinated to see. I think what we tend to see is that a lot of individual reps, and I was one for a long time, so it's not casting stones, will say, oh, the data is outdated. Sometimes the data is the data, right? Like there's, it's going to feel bad for the end user, but that's just the truth on the ground, right?
Yeah, so it's back. The results are in. Outdated 34%, mostly accurate, which I would be interested in meeting with these companies and asking questions. Just I think we could probably poke a hole or two in that, right? And then we've enriched our CRM data within the past week was 16%. So 34, 53, and 16. So you thought that it would be mostly enriched.
Yeah,
does
I was
this
wrong.
surprise you?
It definitely does. I mean, I think, enrichment can be, I guess, categorized different people think of it a different way. When I think of enrichment, I think of sort of taking domains or email addresses or other unique identifiers and bringing in all the attribute data about that on a regular basis. And, that stuff can happen real time now. So as an example, in our process for inbound, between the time someone submits a lead and gets a call back from us, is generally about 90 seconds. And people can feel free to test that if they want to talk to ZoomInfo. But all of that enrichment happens in that 90 seconds to go out and pull all the data, route, assign, do all the things that are necessary to make that record really robust. And so that's all out there today. It's tech that exists for any company. So be excited to help some of the folks on this webinar discover that through Quantum or through ZoomInfo.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And as we kind of move along here, I want to be cognizant of time. So we've got about 15 minutes, but this looks like a pretty exciting slide. Share with us what this is showing.
Yeah, just for those who are not familiar with ZoomInfo and haven't used it before, we've basically built the largest and most impactful set of go-to-market data on the planet, we believe. And there's just a lot of resources that go into making that right. So to Sean, to your point around data decay and how things change, it really takes a combination of people, technology, systems to create this flywheel, to go out and source this data, to process it, to make sure that we're giving it to customers in a compliant way. And there's a lot of details in here, but as an example, all the way to the right, we've profiled over 31,000 technologies that we track of what's going on in someone's tech stack. And there's so many learnings behind the scene. If you can piece together different parts of this to create an insight, right? Of like, if you know the persona or the mix of people at a company, and their tech stack, and what they've been searching on intent, the three of those things together can produce, a real human insight of like, we noticed that you have this piece of tech, but not that one, but you also have 3 people in your org who are with this title. The presence of those 3 things together gets to the second order effects of like what's going on inside the company. So a lot of numbers here around like how we do it, but the key thing is that there's a lot of depth and rigor of combining raw data to produce insights. But yeah, Sean, would love to know your perspective on how that manifests for some of your customers.
So I love this slide. What we do is we take all of these insights, right, and we bring them into our CRM. We begin to market to them, we begin to call them, and then we layer on those behaviors in with this. So we know which, say, 20,000 CEOs have ever picked up the phone for us. And our team is capable of making 2,000 dials in a day, right, on the top end. So let's say 100 to 200 pick up. That means every day we're getting that. So now when you say, give me every CEO of a company who has shown intent for, we'll say HubSpot, have them come in, and then 60 days later, we know people that have done that, and their CEO answers the phone and opened 3 emails, but maybe they haven't quite booked yet, right? And so I think an effect that most people recognize is if you leave a cart in a retail environment online and the ad follows you, or you get an email saying, hey, you might have forgot this. We're trying to take that in a similar approach to B2B, right? How do we stay in front of the right people at the right time with the right message and hit them where they're at, make it a personalized journey at scale and execute? And there's just no way you can't grow your business if you pull off even just a small percentage of the potential of what you can do with all the data and the plays put together. So it's awesome. All right, proper integration and automation of the tech stack. So it's all amazing stuff. The one thing that we see oftentimes is if people don't execute on it, it's really not going to help them move the ball as much as they'd like, right? And so I love that you've actually put the plays together, Ben, to show them exactly how to run the play based on the data, because that could be something that for your average executive could be a little bit intimidating. And so for you guys to put that together is really great. But first things first, guys, do a tech stack audit, see what things are or not talking to each other. Could they be talking to each other? Should they be talking to each other? Is there something that does the same thing that would integrate nicely? And then what are some of the best in class technologies like a ZoomInfo to help you get what you need? And then it's how do we stay out in front of it, right? And so in the next 24 months, 30% of all B2B companies are going to employ AI to augment at least one of their primary sales processes. And as you kind of go through, you can see some of the stats, but this isn't for this call, but when you look at Chat GPT and you look at the integrations coming with Open.ai, you look at ZoomInfo and some, Salesforce, HubSpot, there are some amazing things happening in the sales space right now. And I don't think most B2B companies are even aware of what's coming, right? And the shock's going to be when the competitor figures it out before they do.
Totally. Yeah. And for those of you who haven't already tried Chat GPT, it's coming for every single company and every role to be a part of your world. And it should be exciting. I don't think it should be seen as a threat. It should be seen as a huge opportunity for companies. What can they build on top of this? So I'm glad you mentioned it. We're actually going to add a section to the Plays site that is the GPT suggested template based on the inputs of the play. So we'll give them the recipe and the trigger and say, what do you think this message should say? And it's a little bit for fun, but it's also, I think, pointing at like, this is where we're going, right? Like you can sort of feed all the raw data to the machine and ask it what to do. Like that's where the world's heading. We're there, right? I mean, we're already there.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, which really takes it even to that content piece that I saw in one of your prior slides, and how by basing it on personas, and then if you guys put that play together, they just got to plug in the persona, which I'm sure at some point that'll even be automated quickly. They're flipping out the right content to the right person at the right company at the right time. They have the right data. It's unbelievable the speed at which they can go to market. I said in a prior webinar that when I first got out of college, I sold newspaper ads, and a newspaper ad could be tens of thousands of dollars for a Sunday ad. You can now have a complete go-to-market motion for $20,000, $10,000 a month, depending on what you're all going to do. And you could be a two-person company with a Fortune 500 type of go-to-market with the stuff that's out there. It's pretty wild.
Totally. And that's a big part of this effort that, we're doing here. Like, I like to use the term go to market for all, because we're trying to level the playing field and make this sort of sophisticated motion available to any company.
So let's talk a little bit about the tools. What sales and marketing automation and AI tools are you currently using? Do you guys have ZoomInfo, Salesforce, HubSpot, Connect and Sell, others to help you empower and enable your organization? Oh, this is awesome. There's quite a few with ZoomInfo, which we would of course expect on this. Salesforce and HubSpot is split about 50-50. So there's some awesome stuff there. A small percentage Connect and Sell with a little bit of love, but I think that's an utilized kind of an unknown, right? And so when you talk about efficiency, if you got the data pumping in, and then that human aspect of automating that SDR and letting them get in front of 1,500 to 2,000 dials in a day. I think if anybody on here is not using Connect and Sell, they should definitely be looking at that. And then we have other, so we can probably ask, if people want to throw those in the chat, what some of the others are. I'm going to end it here and share it out. So here's what it looks like, guys. 47% are using ZoomInfo, 50% are using Salesforce, 47% are using HubSpot. Some duplication maybe there because some companies use both, but it could be interesting to figure that one of those two has been used by almost everybody. A small chunk using Connect and Sell, and then 40% using other. What do you think some of the others might be, Ben?
I guess some of the other things that come to mind are like, tools around sales automation, whether they're using something from ZoomInfo like Engage or Outreach or SalesLoft, or one of those are a common piece of the stack. And then increasingly we're seeing people, relying on workflow vendors, whether it's workflows from something like ZoomInfo or in your CRM, but one way or the other, making sure that people have the ability to sort of define sources and destinations for how they move data around. That is a frontier that most companies are still doing manually and still trying to crack the code on.
Yeah, so a few fun questions have come up. It looks like we answered a couple inside of, looks like chats are locked. So I don't know, Heidi, if you can change that. But someone said, I've been asking everyone in sales automation this question. Can and are you implementing AI at the same level of Chat GPT? And how many sales positions will AI in sales make redundant and eliminate? I'll let you take the first stab at that one.
Sure. I heard Jeff Bezos had a comment or a quote one time where he said, we've been automating and moving people up the value chain for like a century, maybe more, right? Like he uses the point that like there's so many jobs that exist today that nobody would have ever thought of, because we've freed up a lot of time for creativity and sort of like creating a satisfactory sort of like personal experience. For example, yoga teachers, massage therapists, like these are all jobs that didn't exist 50 or 100 years ago. And the reason is because we're moving people sort of up that value chain, and they don't have to do things like index card filing or whatever, all the things that used to happen in the library, like all that happens in computers. So yeah, people change jobs. I think it will impact salespeople a lot. I think it'll impact more tactically like blog post writers and, just like pure content creators first. Salespeople tend to create content, but with a lot of other inputs, like what's going on at that company and who are people that I know. And like, there's a more human element to it. But over time, we'll piece more of those things together with computers, and it will free them up to do really creative work and to do things that are, I think, more fulfilling. Like a lot of what's going to get automated is stuff people hate doing anyway. So I think like embrace it is my suggestion to everyone.
I love that and totally agree with you on that. So what are the most popular go-to-market CRM and sales enablement platforms or sales stack you're seeing for early stage startups? So I'll take that one. But what I'm really seeing, again, it depends. Not everybody is wanting to build $1 billion startup. But if you're wanting to build a really nice startup, I'm seeing HubSpot, ZoomInfo, those are some awesome tools that are easy to integrate, easy to utilize, and bring a lot of bang for the buck. And I also know, like, for instance, in HubSpot's case, they have a startup program where there's some discounting and stuff there. So that would be a potential possibility for a startup, and free version as well. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but there's a ton of great stuff happening out in the sales tech and marketing tech space right now that's absolutely phenomenal. And then we have an individual that just said they love Connect and Sell, and it's helping them, really integrate different pieces of their sales process and be more effective and efficient. All right, so we'll kind of keep moving here.
Yeah, and I know we're getting close on time, but I'll just try to summarize this really quickly. If you go back to that last slide, I think one way to visualize this and sort of think about that end-to-end go-to-market motion is there's really 3 layers that we recommend most companies try to figure out as they try to scale. Like the data foundation layer, who are all the companies? What do we know about them? Who are all the people? What are their titles? What are their email addresses, phone numbers, et cetera? Then things like what tech stacks are they installing? And then, what temporal data is out there? Are they on your website? Are they surging on intent, et cetera? That's sort of the foundation. And once you have that, it's easy to figure out, okay, what are the things we can do with that data? When this thing changes in the real world, what are the steps or the recipe that we go and execute on with that data? And then at the top layer is really the play or the engagement layer of like, how does that manifest in an outbound sequence or an ad that's being served or personalization on the website or a chatbot, being more thoughtful around an interaction with a customer? So we won't go through every one of these plays, but again, this is sort of a snapshot of what already exists on our plays site. I would just encourage companies to really think about this holistically, right? Don't just think about like, oh, we've got a bunch of data, we're ready to go to market, or we've got a bunch of channels that we can use like outbound or ads, we're ready to go to market. Like take 2 steps back, write it all down. What are all the plays you could run? Which ones do you want to prioritize? How does the data feed those plays? How do you plug the humans in? Get into the details. So that's really what this playbook effort is meant to show. And anytime, as you can tell, Sean and I get excited about geeking out on go-to-market playbooks. Any of the people on this call who want to spend time with us talking about how they can bring a version of this to their company, we're ready for it.
Awesome. No, I think that's great. How do let's see, attendees can chat with everyone. So I just changed that. So if you've got something you want to throw in the chat, feel free, because I know we're kind of down to the last couple of slides. I don't want to cut Ben off, but maybe.
No, and I think what I'll just say, Sean, for this one, maybe leave it right here. Like this is an example of sort of bringing together like what's probably happening in a given company anyway. And the idea here is that there's raw data that might tell you like, oh, they have this piece of tech or they have this title of people. It's when you can combine that to get to the second order effects of like, what does all this data mean? That's where you can get to a more sophisticated, like almost what the best human would do, but being able to put it on Rails. So as an example, like being able to tell based on the mix of people and their tech stack, like what their sales motion is, so you can better think about how to talk to them. And maybe if you want to talk to them in the first place, it's an example of getting to those second order effects of going from like observation of like, I noticed X thing to an insight of like, I noticed X, Y, and Z, and the 3 of those things together tend to produce this outcome. That's really, I think, what the insight that customers are looking for. So we won't have time to go through all of these, but this is an example, like you take a couple hops from the raw data to get to real meaning behind your GTM.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's awesome. And then Heidi Davis, she loves to run plays with you. I think that she might have said that to everybody. What is this?
Yeah, so this is actually an example of a really, more exotic data sourcing that would powered one of our plays. So we acquired a company called Comparably in April, and they do employer branding. So if you want to, make sure that you're hiring the best people and the candidates in the market think of you first, what do you do to sort of manage your employer brand? So we thought, hey, how many companies are mentioning the word culture in their earnings transcripts. And so what we did is we looked through the earnings transcripts of all 4,000 public companies in the US, and over 700 of the 4,000 in Q2 mentioned the word culture from their CFO or their CEO. So all we did was say, okay, go and clip that 10 words on either side of the word culture, and we'll insert the clip or the snippet into the email to say, hey, your CEO talks about culture right here. Here's the quote. Let's talk about that, right? So some people might think, oh, like that's just a ZoomInfo play. Well, if you sell to enterprise at all, right, there's a version of that for you. Like, what are these companies talking about in their public statements? And you can hold them to that. So, I think this is one example, but my sense is that most companies leverage something like 3 or 4 attributes to power most of their plays, generally geography, company size, and vertical, right? Industry or something like that.
Was that automated to get that snippet?
Yeah, we were able to use custom code to go out there and pull this from publicly available transcripts. So, this is something that like people see as a science project, but my sense is that there's like hundreds and hundreds of these custom attributes that you can go and find. And many of them are going to be so specific to your company that like ZoomInfo is not going to sell them to you, but you can use ZoomInfo as a launching point to figure out, hey, of companies that we care about, can we go find this piece of data that then unlocks a play, unlocks an insight, unlocks something really specific to say? And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's a failure of imagination in most cases. It's not that this play doesn't exist for every company. Every great company has a version of this play. It's around like really getting your hands dirty to go and find that data to do it. So yeah, I don't know. I know this is
like a big play we can run, right? Is we'll work with organizations to figure out everyone who's hiring for a certain position. Like in our case, right? If they put money aside for SDRs or salespeople, they already have the budget earmarked. So depending on what you're selling, what you're doing, if you're services based, especially, go find that out and then find the decision makers at those companies that meet the personas, get the information and run your play. That's a really good one because that budget's already earmarked.
Totally. Right. And every company should think of like, what is our version of that? And this is one more I'll just quickly touch on. I know we're running low on time, but again, most of these plays are locked inside the heads of your best reps. So find out what your best rep is doing when they have unlimited time and perfect data sitting in front of them, and you'll find your next play. So as an example, this was a play that, we ran a long time ago for another company who basically said what they would do is go look at organic and paid keyword data to figure out what products a company was bidding on, what terms, what phrases, et cetera, were they paying for in SEO and search. And what they did is they used that data to power a visual of like, hey, when you're on your sales calls, imagine being able to hear about a competitor and being able to do something with it. So what we did is we used an API to go out and source this data for every company to say, hey, what are all the words that they're bidding on as a proxy for like what they care about? And then weaving that data into a visual to say, hey, imagine if on your sales calls, you could see dynamic competitor mentioned. And so everybody was seeing a different competitor on a row by row basis from overlapping spend on keyword data. So again, like a lot of heavy lifting. I don't think most companies are going to want to go and run a play like this tomorrow, but the point is that they're out there, and that if you can sort of use your imagination to figure out like this version of this type of play, but for you, it can be really impactful. And like I said, find your best rep, sit them down, ask them to walk through their process. And my sense is that the best plays are already living inside your company and happening. They're just not industrialized to happen on a regular basis.
I love that, man. Yeah. Chorus is so amazing. Have a great day, guys.